The year was 1995. A quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knows their neighbors. Or so they thought. On a chilly October evening, the calm was shattered. A young man named Ben Carter was found dead. He was just 24 years old, full of life, with a future that seemed bright. The scene was brutal. It spoke of rage. It spoke of violence. But who would want to hurt Ben? He was well-liked, a good friend, a loving son. The police arrived, their flashing lights painting the suburban street in strokes of red and blue. A mystery had just begun, one that would haunt this town for decades. His girlfriend, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, was devastated, or so it seemed. She told police a story of a break-in gone wrong, a masked intruder, a struggle. She was the sole witness, her account the only thread investigators had to pull. She described the horror of it all, the terrifying sounds, the chaos. Her voice trembled as she recounted the final moments of Ben's life. Detectives looked into her eyes, searching for clues, for truth, and all they saw was a grieving girlfriend, a victim herself. The community wrapped its arms around her. They offered comfort. They offered support. They had no idea who they were comforting. The investigation began with a burst of energy. Police canvassed the neighborhood. They interviewed friends, family, anyone who knew Ben. Every lead was a dead end. Every theory crumbled under scrutiny. The masked intruder Sarah described vanished into thin air. No fingerprints, no footprints, no weapon. It was as if a ghost had committed the crime and then simply floated away. The case file grew thicker, filled with notes and reports that led nowhere. The initial momentum slowed, then it stalled. And finally, it stopped. The case went cold. A chilling, unsolved murder in a town that prided itself on its safety. Ben Carter's family was left with a gaping hole in their lives, and a mountain of unanswered questions. Who did this? And why? They attended every press conference. They pleaded for anyone with information to come forward, but the silence was deafening. Sarah Jenkins, the grieving girlfriend, eventually moved away. She started a new life, far from the whispers and the memories of that terrible night. The town tried to forget, but some things, some dark and terrible things, refuse to be forgotten. They just wait, patiently, biding their time in the shadows of the past, for 30 long years. 30 years is a long time, long enough to build a new life from the ground up. And that's exactly what Sarah Jenkins did. She left her old name behind, along with the ghosts of 1995. She became Sarah Miller. She married a kind, steady man named Frank. They had 2 children. They bought a house with a white picket fence. On the surface, it was the American dream. She was a soccer mom, a devoted wife, a pillar of her new community. No one would ever guess the secret she carried. The dark truth locked away behind her warm, friendly smile, a secret that defined her every move. Her days were a performance, a carefully crafted illusion of normalcy. Every school bake sale, every neighborhood barbecue, every holiday gathering was a scene in her long-running play. She had to be perfect, flawless. Any crack in the facade might let the darkness seep through. She avoided true intimacy, even with her own husband. There was a part of her soul she could never share, a locked room in her mind that Frank was never allowed to enter. Did he ever sense it? That distance? That carefully constructed wall she lived behind? For years, it seemed he didn't. He saw the woman he loved, the mother of his children. How does one live like that, with a ticking time bomb in their past? Psychologists might call it compartmentalization, the ability to wall off a traumatic or terrible event from the rest of your life. Sarah was a master of it. The murder of Ben Carter wasn't just a memory, it was a non-entity. It did not exist in her new world. She never spoke of her life before Frank. Her childhood was a vague sketch, her college years, a blur. She told people she was from a different state, erasing the town where Ben died from her personal history. It was a lie built upon a lie, a house of cards standing on a shaky foundation. But secrets have a weight, and over 30 years that weight becomes immense. It can crush you. Sarah suffered from nightmares. She had bouts of anxiety she explained away as stress. She was fiercely protective of her privacy, almost to a paranoid degree. Her children knew their mother was a little different, A little more intense, a little more guarded. They just didn't know why. They didn't know that their mother's entire life was an act of deception, an act that was about to come to a shocking, dramatic end. The curtain was about to fall. Frank Miller loved his wife. For nearly 3 decades, he believed he knew her. He knew her favorite color. He knew how she took her coffee. He knew the sound of her laughter. But there was always something he couldn't quite reach, a shadow in her eyes that would appear at odd moments, a sudden sadness that she could never explain. He chalked it up to a difficult past, something she didn't want to talk about. He respected her privacy. He gave her space. He never pushed. He just loved her, thinking love was enough to heal whatever wounds she carried. He was wrong. The change was gradual, a slow unraveling. It started with a late-night confession, mumbled in her sleep. A name he didn't recognize. Ben, she'd said. Just once. But it planted a seed of doubt in Frank's mind. Who was Ben? Then came the small slips, a story that didn't add up. An old photograph he found in a dusty box, a picture of a younger Sarah with a man he'd never seen. When he asked, she became defensive, angry. The reaction was too strong, too volatile. It wasn't just a secret she was keeping, it was something more, something heavier. The breaking point came during a heated argument about something trivial, the mortgage, the kids' grades. But the small fight ripped open a much larger wound. In a moment of pure, unrestrained fury, Sarah screamed something at him. "You have no idea what I've done!" The words hung in the air between them, thick and cold. It was the way she said it, the look in her eyes. It was a look Frank had never seen before. It was fear. It was guilt. And it was a confession, without confessing a thing. In that moment, Frank knew his wife's secret was not just a sad story. It was a dark one. The seed of doubt had now grown into a terrifying certainty. Frank spent sleepless nights on the internet, his fingers typing in old towns, old names. He was a man possessed, driven by a need to understand the woman he had shared his life with. And then he found it. A yellowed news article from 1995. Local man murdered, girlfriend a sole witness. The girlfriend's name was Sarah Jenkins. He stared at the grainy photo. It was his wife, the woman sleeping in the next room, the mother of his children. And in that cold, quiet moment, with the blue light of the computer screen on his face, Frank Miller's world fell apart. The phone call came in on a Tuesday morning. It was 2025. At the police department in that small, quiet town, Detective Miller, no relation, picked up the receiver. He was a young cop, not even born when Ben Carter was killed. The case was a legend in the department, the ultimate cold case. The voice on the other end was a man's. He was hesitant, his words trembling. I think I have information about an old murder," he said. From 1995, the murder of Ben Carter. Cold case calls were not uncommon. Usually they were cranks or conspiracy theorists. But there was something different about this one. Something real. The man on the phone was Frank Miller. He didn't give his name at first. He just talked. He spoke of his wife, Sarah. He spoke of a secret she'd kept for 30 years. He told the detective about the sleep-talking, the old photograph, the terrifying outburst. He was piecing together a puzzle, and he was horrified by the picture that was emerging. He told the detective his wife's maiden name, Sarah Jenkins. A silence fell over the phone line. Detective Miller felt a jolt. Sarah Jenkins, the grieving girlfriend, the sole witness, the one person who was there. Why would a husband turn in his own wife? After 30 years, after building a life together. Was it revenge? Was it a messy divorce? The detective had to consider all possibilities. But as Frank spoke, his voice cracking with emotion, a different picture emerged. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about the crushing weight of a lie that had become too heavy for one family to bear. Frank spoke of Ben Carter's family, a family he'd never met. He imagined their 3 decades of not knowing, the injustice of it all. He was a man trapped between his love for his wife and his duty to a stranger's memory. The decision had tormented him for weeks. He loved Sarah. He still did. But she wasn't the woman he thought he married. She was a stranger living in his house, a ghost from a violent past. Turning her in would destroy his family. His children's lives would be shattered. But not turning her in? That felt like being an accomplice to a lie, an accomplice to a murder. In the end, his conscience won. He gave the detective his address. He agreed to cooperate. The call ended, and a 30-year-old case frozen in time suddenly, violently thawed. With Frank's call, the cold case was reborn. A new team of investigators, armed with new technology, opened the dusty boxes from 1995. They looked at the old evidence with fresh eyes. Sarah Jenkins's original testimony was the centerpiece. Her story of a masked intruder, a story that 30 years ago police had no reason to doubt. But now, they had every reason. Frank's information gave them a new lens through which to view the entire case. Every word Sarah had said back then was now suspect. Every tear she had shed was now questioned. The grieving victim was now the prime suspect. Detectives flew across the country to the quiet suburban town where Sarah Miller lived her perfect life. They found a woman who was a stranger to the person in the old case file. This Sarah was confident, poised, and completely unaware of the storm that was about to break. They questioned her at her home, the house with the white picket fence. At first, she was calm. She denied everything. She claimed her husband was lying, that he was mentally unstable. She played the part of the wronged wife perfectly, the same part she had played 30 years ago, the victim. But the detectives were persistent. They had Frank's story. They presented her with the old evidence, with the inconsistencies in her original statement. They talked about Ben. They used his name. And with every mention, a small crack appeared in her composure. The key, however, was not in the old evidence, but in the new. Frank had told them about a small, locked box Sarah kept hidden in the attic. A box she had told him held old family heirlooms. With a search warrant in hand, investigators opened it. Inside, there were no heirlooms. There was a diary from 1995. The diary was the smoking gun. Page after page, written in a young woman's frantic script, detailed a tumultuous relationship with Ben Carter. It spoke of jealousy, of arguments, of rage. And then, on a date in late October, a final, chilling entry. It described a fight that spiraled out of control. It described grabbing a heavy lamp. It described a moment of blind fury. It didn't explicitly say I killed him, but it didn't have to. The words painted a picture of guilt and panic. It was a confession, written 30 years ago and hidden away. The secret was out. Sarah Jenkins, now Sarah Miller, was arrested for the murder of Ben Carter. The trial was a media sensation. It was a story seemingly ripped from a Hollywood script, the perfect suburban mom accused of a brutal 30-year-old murder. Her own husband, the star witness for the prosecution. The courtroom was packed every single day. On one side, the prosecution, armed with a 30-year-old diary and the testimony of a heartbroken husband. On the other, the defense, trying to paint Sarah as the victim of a vindictive spouse and a shoddy, long-ago investigation. The past and present collided in a dramatic legal battle. Frank Miller took the stand. It was the most difficult moment of his life. He had to look at the woman he had loved, the mother of his children, and testify against her. His voice was steady as he recounted the slow unraveling of her secret. He spoke of his love and his confusion, and finally his dawning horror. The defense attorneys were relentless. They attacked his motives. They accused him of wanting to get rid of his wife. They tried to portray him as a villain. But Frank's testimony was simple, honest, and devastatingly believable. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man who had stumbled upon an unbearable truth. The prosecution then presented the diary. An expert confirmed the handwriting was Sarah's. They read passages aloud to the jury. The words of a young, angry Sarah echoed in the silent courtroom, a voice from the grave. They detailed her rage at Ben for wanting to break up with her. The final entry was the climax. The defense argued it was just fiction, the ramblings of an emotional young woman, but combined with Frank's testimony and the inconsistencies in her original police statement, The diary was damning. It was Sarah's own voice, convicting her from 3 decades in the past. Sarah Miller herself did not testify. She sat silently beside her lawyers, her face an unreadable mask. What was she thinking? Was she the grieving soccer mom, wrongly accused? Or was she the cold, calculating killer who had almost gotten away with it? The jury had to decide. They had to look at this 54-year-old woman and see the 24-year-old she once was. They had to sift through 30 years of lies to find a single moment of truth. After days of deliberation, they returned. The foreman stood up, cleared his throat, and looked directly at Sarah. Guilty. The guilty verdict sent ripples through 3 families. For Ben Carter's family, it was a moment they had waited 30 years for. His elderly parents, now in their 80s, wept in the courtroom. It was not a happy victory. It would not bring their son back. But it was an answer. It was a closing of a wound that had been left open for a generation. The masked intruder, the ghost that had haunted their lives, finally had a face. And it was the face of the woman who had pretended to grieve alongside them. Justice, delayed for so long, had finally arrived. For Frank Miller and his children, the verdict was the beginning of a different kind of pain. Their family was destroyed. Their mother was a murderer. Their father was the one who had sent her to prison. How do you recover from that? The children were caught between love for their mother and the horrifying truth of her actions. Frank was left to pick up the pieces of a life built on a lie. He had done the right thing, the just thing. But the cost was immense. He had lost his wife, and in many ways, the life he had known. There were no easy answers for them, only a long and difficult road ahead. And what of Sarah Miller? She was sentenced to life in prison. The perfect life she had so carefully constructed was gone, replaced by a concrete cell. Did she feel remorse, or did she only feel regret for being caught? In the end, her motives remained locked away, just as her secret had been for so long. She was a chilling example of how ordinary people can commit extraordinary evil and hide in plain sight. Her story is a testament to the corrosive power of secrets and the simple, undeniable fact that the past is never truly past. It is always there, waiting. This case serves as a powerful reminder. A reminder that justice may sleep, but it does not die. For detectives, it shows that no case is ever truly cold. For families of victims, it offers a glimmer of hope that answers can be found, even after decades of silence. The story of Sarah Miller is a dark, cautionary tale. It shows that the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, has a way of clawing its way to the surface. And that sometimes the most shocking betrayals come not from our enemies, but from the people we promise to love, honor, and trust.